the daily cycle of the Earth to the eastern horizon. Each day, its light penetrates the darkness as it has for eons. But during this limitless span of time, man has evolved from the primordial state to the sophisticated technology of space flight. And here at Cape Canaveral, Florida, the United States Air Force has established an unusual museum, one which is permanently preserved with actual space hardware, a history of rocketry that preceded man's venture into space. The exact origin of rocketry is lost in the mists of the unrecorded past. However, historians estimate that the Chinese developed primitive skyrockets over 2,000 years ago. These arrows of fire were used to chase away demons and to please the gods. The first significant use of military rockets took place at the siege of Fort McHenry in 1812. British rockets hurled explosive warheads to targets a mile and a half away, an event which inspired the phrase, "the rocket's red glare," in our national anthem. During World War I, rockets mounted on French pursuit planes were effectively used to destroy enemy observation balloons. One of the key developments in space history began with Dr. Robert H. Goddard, a physics professor often referred to as the father of modern rocketry. In 1926, at Auburn, Massachusetts, he created and fired the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. Altitude of 184 feet in 2½ seconds. Eventually, Dr. Goddard's propulsion system would take men and machines to the very surface of the moon. During World War II, German scientists developed a potent weapon, the liquid-fueled V-2 rocket. V-2s, armed with high explosive warheads, rained heavy destruction on Great Britain. This demonstration of power suddenly awakened the military and scientific communities to the potential of rocketry. After the war, V-2 rockets and German scientists arrived at White Sands, New Mexico, where an American program of research and development was started. As the program expanded, a larger and better situated launch area and range was needed. The choice was Cape Canveral, a narrow strip of Florida marshland facing a 5,000-mile stretch of uninterrupted Atlantic Ocean. On July 24, 1950, Bumper, a modified V-2, became the first rocket to be fired from the Cape. With this successful launch, a new era in rocketry began. Missile test programs with strange-sounding names soon crowded the launch schedule. Matador an Air Force winged missile launched from a mobile platform. It flew at subsonic speed and had limited range. Snark, the first missile designed to have intercontinental range. And Redstone, a U.S. Army short-range ballistic missile. Redstones would eventually boost America's first satellite and first astronaut into space. As testing increased, it was necessary to add support facilities. A center for control of range safety, instrumentation, and scheduling. Larger launch pads for more powerful rockets. And advanced electronics to record the rocket's flight for later analysis. This was Navajo, a winged jet rocket-boosted system designed for a 5,000-mile range at supersonic speed. Although plagued with difficulties, Navajo provided answers to many technical questions about propulsion and guidance. Much was learned even from dismal failures. Knowledge gained from Navajo was a factor in the success of Jupiter, a U.S. Army intermediate-range ballistic missile. Jupiter helped to solve the problem of nose cone re-entry into the atmosphere from space. The Air Force Thor, another intermediate-range ballistic missile, a rocket which performed so successfully that it would later be used by NASA as a standard booster for a majority of its satellite launches. But even as we made progress in rocketry, so did the Soviet Union. In October 1957, the Soviets captured world attention with the launch of Sputnik 1, a 184-pound satellite which circled the Earth every 96 minutes. Spurred by this achievement, the U.S. Navy hurriedly attempted to launch a Vanguard satellite in December 1957. It failed after only 2 seconds of thrust. Reaction to this failure was swift. An earlier rejected plan by the Army's General George Medeiros and Dr. Werner von Braun was quickly put into motion. A modified Redstone called Jupiter C was prepared for the launch of America's first space satellite. On this historic occasion, a dedicated launch team, headed by Dr. Kurt Debus, completed the countdown. On January 31st, 1958, the tiny 31-pound Explorer 1 satellite rose into the night sky. "98 minutes later, orbit was confirmed, and the first step of American space exploration was accomplished. Progress in rocketry moved rapidly in another direction as a response to the growing threat of nuclear aggression. In 1957, the U.S. Navy fired the first Polaris missile from a submerged nuclear submarine. Improved versions of this powerful weapon are a vital part of the nation's defense posture. Advances in the development of solid-fueled rocket motors gave America the potent Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile.
Stand mark and deluge, disable. Disable. Cage gyros and gyro heaters on.
launched from a protected underground silo. The Minuteman is capable of carrying multiple nuclear warheads, which can seek targets half a world away. One of the more significant developments in American rocketry was the Atlas, an Air Force intercontinental ballistic missile. It would serve the nation not only as a weapon system, but also as a reliable booster for an impressive number of space accomplishments. Finally, man himself was ready to venture into space. On May 5, 1961, Commander Alan B. Shepard arrived at the Launch Complex 5-6, where a Mercury Redstone rocket stood ready, fully fueled, and checked out for America's first manned flight. A successful but brief suborbital ride to an altitude of 115 miles.
ECS free on off. Free on off. CO, control fuel. Station. Roger, Watch the panel.
Automatic fuel is 95, manual is 96, cameras and tape recorders are running.
I have a cap.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off. All Roger, lift off and the clock is started. The fuel is go, 1.2G, cabin at 14 PSI.
Not a very startling flight record by today's standards, but it was a beginning. A pathway into space which would lead to man landing on the moon only 8 short years later. On February 20th, 1962, an Atlas rocket launched astronaut John Glenn into America's first manned orbital flight, a milestone event in our space program.
Check pressurization, box tanking, and a blinking high level light. You are go. Water systems, go. Range operations, Mercury capsule, go. All pre-start panel lights are correct. The ready light is on. Check Mercury umbilical. Oil evacuate. Mercury umbilical clear. Mercury evacuate. Lights on.
Roger, backup clock is started.
In 1964, an Atlas booster put a picture-taking Ranger spacecraft on the lunar surface and gave man his first close-up view of the moon. Ranger was followed by Surveyor, which transmitted thousands of photographs and valuable lunar soil data. Later, lunar orbiters circled the moon, pinpointing landing sites for the Apollo astronauts. A series of 10 manned Gemini Titan space flights, each with 2 astronauts aboard, developed maneuvering techniques needed for the Project Apollo moon journey. dramatic achievements of the Gemini series was the famous first walk in space by astronaut Ed White. Equally impressive was the rendezvous of Gemini 6 and 7. This was followed by the successful first docking with an orbiting Agena in the Gemini 8 mission. The luminous orbiting satellite of Earth was now within man's reach.
2, 1, all engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 9:34 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
On July 16, 1969, with the world as a witness, a huge Saturn V rocket with 3 Apollo astronauts aboard roared skyward and began man's most daring adventure, a voyage to the moon. Four days later, almost 250,000 miles away from Earth, man's age-old dream of landing on the moon was spectacularly fulfilled.
Okay, 75 feet. Car's looking good. Down a half. 6 forward. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 40 feet. Down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet. 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. Ready? Down a half. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
By the end of the Apollo project, 12 men had walked on the moon. In later missions, the range of their explorations were extended by the Lunar Roving Vehicle, the first manned transportation system to operate on the lunar surface. 6 landing sites were explored, each representing different types of terrain, each yielding new information and discoveries.
Oh, man, look at that. Look at the glimpse. Almost see twinning in there. Guess what we just found? Guess what we just found? I think we found what we came for. Crystal and rock, huh? Yes, sir. You better believe it.
On one lunar rover trip, the astronauts found a unique crystalline stone now called the Genesis rock, which is estimated to be more than 4 billion years old. Hundreds of pounds of rock and soil samples were collected and returned to Earth for analysis. Numerous experiments provided information on various lunar conditions. Nuclear-powered ALSEPs, Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment packages, were activated at 5 of the landing sites. Long after the last astronaut had departed, ALSEPs were reporting to Earth on lunar events of scientific importance. Project Apollo was a huge step forward in man's understanding of the moon, the Earth, and the universe. And yet it was just a beginning. While Apollo was oriented toward the long-term benefits of deep space, Project Skylab concentrated on the more immediate advantages of placing men in near-Earth orbit. From May 1973 through February 1974, 9 astronauts, in groups of 3 per mission, lived a total of 171 days aboard the Skylab workshop, an orbiting scientific laboratory. Investigations and experiments performed by the Skylab astronauts produced scientific observations of quality and quantity never before possible on Earth. Photographic surveys conducted from Skylab are leading us to solutions of problems on Earth: large-scale control of pollution, prevention of crop disease and famine, the location of mineral resources. These are among the many Skylab benefits we will experience for years to come. Another series of experiments showed that materials many times lighter and stronger than any made on Earth can be produced in the weightless environment of space. These experiments may form the basis for the creation of whole new industries. Finally, through carefully controlled medical studies, the astronauts proved that man can live and work effectively in space for indefinite periods. Skylab was another major milestone which revealed exciting potentials for the use of man in space. Well before Apollo and Skylab, the Air Force was developing Titan III, the standard space launch system. Workhorse Titan III boosters have placed tons of payload in orbit. The dozens of satellites launched by Titan III vehicles have provided vital defense communications, nuclear detection capability, and data for scientific research projects.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Water is indicated on
1, 0.
liftoff indication.
The versatile Titan III continues to serve the nation with a wide variety of useful space missions. Titan Centaur launched 2 of NASA's Viking spacecraft in a spectacular space event which celebrated the nation's bicentennial, the landing of 2 scientific laboratories on the planet Mars. Viking 1 landed in the Chryse region on July 20th, 1976, and began sending back startlingly clear pictures of the Martian terrain. 6 weeks later, Viking 2 soft landed on the Utopian Plain, several thousand miles north and east of the Viking 1 site. Initial experiments revealed some surprising data, the exact meaning of which can be revealed only after detailed scientific analysis. International cooperation in manned space flight was demonstrated by Apollo-Soyuz. With precise timing, 3 American astronauts aboard an Apollo spacecraft caught up and docked with the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. This rendezvous and docking maneuver, for the first time, confirmed the feasibility of space rescue operations. The cosmonauts welcomed the Americans. Crews were exchanged, and a number of experiments were conducted, including satellite relayed communications. Official flight documents were signed by both crews, validating another major event in space history. For several years, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station has been selected as an ideal test site for a number of unpublicized R&D projects. With the latest state-of-the-art instrumentation, adequate space available, and skilled technicians to operate the data collection systems, the Eastern Test Range resources have proven economically advantageous. The majority of these programs are not related to rocket systems, but are welcomed as a continuing range activity. One of the most consistent long-term clients of the range is the U.S. Navy. The Polaris series of missiles was developed as the prime armament of the nuclear-powered submarine fleet. Next came Poseidon, somewhat larger and with increased range. Now it's Trident testing time. The present nuclear sub-fleet, carrying 16 missiles each, is being retrofitted to accommodate one version of the Trident missile. The largest version requires a larger submarine, the Trident. Its missile capacity is 24. As in the past, submarines and their crews will be rotated to Port Canaveral for shakedown and demonstration tests. But now they have a new facility, a sheltered harbor known as the Trident Turn Basin. Dredged to a depth of 41 feet, the Turn Basin features a 1,200-foot wharf, which can accommodate 2 of the big Trident subs. The next manned venture into space, the Space Shuttle. Following preliminary tests of components at Edwards Air Force Base, the first shuttle system is scheduled for assembly and launch from the Kennedy Space Center. This versatile spacecraft is launched like a rocket, orbits like a satellite, and returns to Earth to land like an aircraft. The shuttle orbiter has a 50,000-pound cargo capacity and may be fitted with satellites to be placed in orbit, workshops for the repair of satellites already in orbit, or laboratories for manufacturing experiments or long-term observations of the heavens or Earth. The future possibilities of shuttling up to 12 passengers to selected points on the globe in matters of minutes, or assembling life-sustaining space platforms, boggles the imagination. Through the past decades, a trailway to the stars has been blazed by hundreds of major launches from Cape Canaveral. These were the great moments in space history. At the Air Force Space Museum, the memories of these milestone events are preserved for posterity. The museum grounds, which include the launch sites for America's first satellite and first astronaut, are home for a unique display of missiles and rockets, some rare and forgotten. At the museum's exhibit hall, colorful and informative displays await the visitor. Just inside the entrance, an art gallery depicts the history of rocketry. There's an actual Gemini spacecraft, the only one which has been flown into space twice. Viewers can closely examine sections of the spacecraft to better understand how our astronauts operated in the hostile environment of space. More than 1.5 million people visit the museum annually to see the free world's largest display of space hardware. On Sundays, visitors are allowed to drive their own cars to the museum, which is open to the public free of charge. Many visitors ride through the grounds on daily commercial bus tours. Air Force conducted official tours can be arranged for a variety of visitors: foreign military men, scientific groups, civic associations and youth groups. Public figures such as Prince Philip of Great Britain are among the many distinguished visitors. People from all walks of life and from all over the world marvel at the rare collection of space vehicles. The Air Force Space Museum at Cape Canveral Air Force Station has become a major tourist attraction, open for all who want first-hand exposure to the exciting developments of space history. The rich history of United States Air Force participation in America's space program can be seen here at the museum, where an enduring record of milestones in space highlight the beginnings of man's journey to the stars.